Welcome to the HR on the Offensive podcast, brought to you by Lace Partners. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the HR on the Offensive podcast. It's me, Chris Howard, joining you as always, as we love to do on these Thursday podcasts that we release. Today, we are back in our Becoming Skills Powered mode. That's our campaign that we're running. If you want to find out more about it, you can access that on our website. It's lacepartners.co.uk/skills. We have got one of our friends. We've got an organisation we know and love called WithYouWithMe, and we've got one of their founders on to have a chat with us. Before I introduce him, I need a co-host. That co-host today is Pavan Bilkhoo, who is helping us to own this fabulous campaign that we're doing. Pav, how you doing? You all right?
I am very well.
You are excited to get into the detail of this one?
I cannot wait. I think the social construct that Tom will help us unpick is going to be very interesting for our listeners.
Yeah, it certainly is. Well, let's introduce him. So, Tom Larter. How you doing, Tom? You all right?
I'm very good. Thanks, Chris. Pav, great to be here. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. So, Tom, for our lovely listeners who maybe have not heard of With You, With Me, or your good self as well, we are going to do the fundamentally different question, but do we want to do a little bit of a check-in? I think we need to do a bit of a check-in first, so you can tell them a little bit about yourself and then a little bit about the business as well, if that's okay.
Yeah, no problem. So Tom Larter, I'm the Chief Executive Officer of With You, With Me. I live in Australia, currently in the UK, enjoying some fine back end of summer weather here in London, and very proud to talk about our company. With You, With Me really wants to shape the future of work and solve what we would describe as underemployment, which in reality is helping people access meaningful work for the future. And our business does two things to sort of contribute to this social problem. We run a free program for disadvantaged groups. It was started largely helping military veterans transition into digital careers, and we've branched that out into a variety of other challenged groups, Indigenous groups, women in tech, neurodivergent. We've done refugee programs, anyone who wouldn't fit the mold of a traditional recruitment practice. We knew early on that we hypothesized that we could use cognitive aptitude and psychometrics matched to a skills framework to help people realize what they were actually capable of in the future at a time when they might not have considered those things. And it worked. And we scaled that globally. We have over 100,000 people on that platform that can access everything for free. And off the back of that, we run a recruit, train, deploy business to put them into meaningful work with our customers. And that's a great impactful part of our business. And then the other thing that we do is we have a very innovative HR tech application called Potential that companies use to align skills to goals as they transition to a skills-based organization. And they're untapping potential. They're running internal talent marketplaces and driving really tailored development to stay on pace with change that's happening with the future of work. And we do that across Australia, the UK, a little bit in the US. We're a scaling, growing, modern tech company.
Love it. Absolutely love it. We're going to get into the detail of that because the stuff around the internal mobility, around the diversity as well. And that's why we wanted to get you guys from With You, With Me on, because we think it's quite a fascinating area that many businesses are tapping into. I'm going to let Pav have the sort of first stab at questions. But before we do that, because I get to be the host of this podcast, I get to ask a fundamentally different question each week. Now, this question that I'm going to hit you both with is an article which I've read this week that the DVLA in the UK has announced that there have been over 100,000 vehicles that unfortunately were stolen in 2023. Some really random ones as well. So bin lorries, ambulances, a hearse, they were all part of vehicles that were stolen in 2023. Quite why people want to steal those is very bizarre to me. And it got me thinking, what is an item that I own either within my car or at home that nobody would ever want to steal in a million years? And I'm going to go first to give you a little bit of an opportunity to think about what you want to select as your item for today. And then I'm going to get Pav, and then we'll get you to give yours, Tom, before we let Pav get into the real detail about talking about this. But mine is sunglasses. So I've got slightly wonky ears, and that's why I buy very cheap sunglasses, because no sunglasses that I ever wear fit anybody else. So that's quite a good deterrent. And I can't imagine that anybody would want a pair of my sunglasses that wouldn't fit them. Pav, what you got?
So I feel like I always have a boring answer to your fundamentally different questions, but this time I can give you a true story. So we found out that somebody had been breaking into our car more than once. So you'd get in the car in the morning and it would already be open. The only thing to go missing were car air freshener, lollipops, and some really old £1 coins. Never thought anybody in their right mind would steal those three things, but hey, who knows?
So you've actually had things that people do want to steal that are random. But Tom, you don't have to stick to the car theme here. You can say anything you want, really, but something that you own that's a little bit random.
Well, I think if this was happening in Australia, I'd be in a relatively safe position. So for all your British listeners, I drive a traditional Land Rover Defender. And if you've never driven one of those, and a lot of Australians haven't, if you wanted to steal that, you kind of have to know the sequence to start that bad boy. Like, you got to get in, you've got to close the door at the same time that you put the key in the slightly awkward bottom left position. And then you've got to realize that the handbrake is actually down near your left shin. And, so I figure at least if someone was trying to steal it, I'd have enough time to get after them while they tried to start the car before they got away.
Love it.
I guess my first question is something that is on most organisations' thinking process at the moment as they develop their people and talent strategies. Love what you guys do from a diversity perspective. Veterans, you mentioned women in tech, you mentioned neurodivergent workforce types. How do you convince organisations that there's value to these groups that they might have previously overlooked?
I will answer your question about how we convince organizations, but what we realized when we first started building the business is we had to convince people first, because often a lot of people, they don't realize their full capability and what they could achieve because they've overcomplicated what particular roles are, or the market has made it more complicated to understand what particular roles are. So we spend a lot of our time in our product helping the candidate, the individual, realize they've got the underlying ability to learn these future skills. And we did that through a modern product that was easy, that used a bit of science, that automatically matched them to skills. And this is how we saw military truck drivers going into data analyst roles, and return to work mums who'd been in administration going into cyber penetration testing. And these are things that they thought they had to go and do a university degree for, or they were never smart enough because they didn't do computer gaming or coding. And they just didn't really have a comprehension of what's actually required on the job for these roles. So we had to solve for making the candidates realize they could do it. And then once you've done that, you start to build a pipeline of available talent. And when you go in and then talk to an organization, it's not so much convincing an organization that they've overlooked these people. And you're definitely not playing kind of a pity card saying you need diversity in your workforce because of X. We're saying we've got the skills. We've unlocked talent pools that you previously weren't thinking about, and they have the skills that you need. And so it was actually the building of the skills that was getting us positive traction with customers more than the diversity language itself. And I personally love that, because you shouldn't be just hiring on diversity, because you need to appreciate that there's great talent sitting in those talent pools. And so we just unlocked that, and that seemed to work, and it made it easier to have that conversation.
And do you think it's just an easier conversation with the business because you're talking skill to skill, right? Are you finding it easier to talk to business leaders? Are you finding it easier to talk to HR, or is it a good blend of both?
In some circumstances, it was easier to go to where the pain was. So a technical team leader that was really struggling to fill and find the capabilities they needed to build a productive team, and to meet us and for them to say, actually, you know what, I got a connection to the military. I do think there's values in that talent pool. And you're saying you can make them into digital resources. I kind of like the sound of that. So it was the technical leads that had the pain is where we got a lot of traction. But then on the other side of our business, certainly around skills-based management and the HR platform, we're definitely working with senior executives and the HR departments who are solving for the future of work, the workforce planning, and all those components. So we're doing both.
What I'm interested in, because obviously what you've talked about with your platform is the different types of diverse groups that you interact and engage with. Do you spot any kind of patterns? And I feel like you might have touched on that just then, like patterns between either types of businesses and types of people that naturally have the skills that fit into, like, that correlate. Are there any type of patterns that you guys come across?
What's been interesting is not so much that there's a pattern between a cohort of individuals, say veterans or return to work mums, that align to a particular skill. The consistency was we've more often than not found the ability to put someone into a digital role from a non-technical background than not. Like, that was mind-blowing.
That's a massive myth to bust.
Huge. And that was our bias from the start, was we go into every candidate conversation with the idea that they've got untapped talent. We've just got to mine it and help them find it. So we're not asking them to tell us what their skills are, because people don't apply for that. We're saying, just sign up, do the testing, let's go on the journey together. And so the patterns that come out of that is we pretty much exclusively work in digital career pathways. We haven't been able to have the time to scale outside of that to a lot of other roles yet, but 100,000 odd people coming through the platform are going into digital roles, and the majority of them are from non-technical backgrounds. So for us, we're now firm that there's not a skills problem. We have people that have the ability, they've got to learn these skills. It's just aligning right person, right time, right job, and that supply and demand matching.
And what's the approach that you recommend to taking that skills-based thinking or skills-powered thinking?
So when we work with organizations now, we find that a lot of our customers and a lot of the market are starting to shift towards skills-based organizations. This language wasn't around as much as it is now. There are definitely organizations that have been doing this for 20 odd years, but in a popular sense, it wasn't around in the last 5 years. So where do we start with them? We typically say a concept of the 3 C's. We think in clarity, in capability, and in closure. So we want to help the organization gain clarity around their occupations by aligning them to a particular skills framework. And then that clarity can be used to help everybody understand the program that we're going to run. We then talk about capability. So then how do I map the current capability that I have within my workforce through a model of self-assessment, manager validation, and other types? And then that helps us align future occupation with current capability. And then closure is about, all right, how do we get to where we want to go based on goals, outcomes, and the strategy? And those 3 C's sort of help us get started with most companies.
This is really interesting. One of the things I'm quite interested in finding out, just from your perspective, when businesses either come to you or you go to them, how much of a learning exercise do you have to take people through? Like, I guess the simple question is, how many businesses kind of get it, the whole skills-based organization stuff? Or how much of it, because you just said, you said yourself, this narrative, this vernacular didn't really exist 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever it is. How easy is it for you guys to be able to get them to do the light bulb moment that's like, oh, okay, we see the value in this. We know that this is going to be beneficial to us.
I think this is evolving. I would not describe it as easy yet. I think a lot of organizations are grappling with, what does this mean for them? How are they going to embark on this journey? And so I absolutely think you're taking them on a learning journey, with them. And you do the same thing. I know Lace does the same thing as well. Like, you're trying to understand where they're at in their journey, because that changes how they might start a particular program. And so we often find ourselves doing a lot of diagnosis up front to try and understand how mature their thinking is, and that might change the start point. But I am genuinely seeing from the market more people wanting to get after this, building business plans and trying to fund this in the coming years.
Thanks. That's really enlightening to see how it's working in practice. And on that kind of practical thought process, recruiting for potential has been a thing for many years, particularly with early careers. Taking this skills-based approach also requires organizations to think about potential in different ways. How do you work with organizations to consider potential as part of their hiring process?
This is a very interesting problem. For a long time, there have been a lot of testing products in the market, certainly around personality and culture fit. A lot of organizations were trying to use that as a way to say, you're a good fit for our current business. And that's changing. The world of work is changing much faster now. And so most organizations are starting to realize they're not hiring for the position today, they're hiring for the position tomorrow. And so that in itself is hiring on potential. It's almost at an extreme level saying that your current skills from your last job are irrelevant. That's not true, but that's an extreme way of saying that what we've got to look for is your entire makeup and how that provides your ability to be successful in the future. So when we talk about hiring a potential, we want to bring a science to how do you measure someone's ability? And for us, it was cognitive aptitude, not personality, cognitive aptitude, and using a synthetic validity algorithm to match cognitive aptitude to a skills framework. So what we're really saying is a person has X percentage affinity to learn that skill. And so when you're looking at them, it's helping you make a decision. If I've got someone with a high affinity to learn the occupation of the future, it's a less risky hiring decision. And then I go and look at their past experience and everything else about that person. So it's new data to drive the positions. That's how we think about potential.
Do you find that HR processes or historic recruitment processes are getting in the way of that thinking?
Yes, I think they are squarely in the way of that thinking. One of the biggest challenges that I think traditional recruitment processes is facing is the candidate experience. By design, they're not attracting the full gamut of the talent pool. And I think a lot of organizations are realizing that now and they're trying to get after how to fix it. But a recruitment process that takes 80 days has no updates. People don't know what's going on. There's no feedback loop, or the same person has to apply multiple times for different jobs in the organization. Like the candidate experience is completely misaligned with the generational talent pool that's applying for those jobs. So I do think there's a barrier here. And I do think that more modern approaches that drive a better UX, a better candidate experience, and focus on someone's future ability more than their past experience will unlock talent pools.
I'm quite interested to get this kind of perception around the language that HR speaks. When you're talking to businesses, how different do you have to be when you're trying to speak that language to HR versus speaking to the rest of the business?
We have found there's lots of confusion around the language. What do we mean by skills, by competencies, by accreditations? Yeah. I think even just with individual customers and partners getting to a level of agreement around what these things mean. And when we say skills, what do we mean? I think is a good start point. Although I am seeing some of that start to normalize in the market around what we mean when we say that. Yes, I think you need different language. So when you're crafting a program with HR about what the workforce wants to look at, what the business wants to look at, versus building an employee value proposition that trades their time for value for them, very, very different. So one of the biggest things that we're trying to get after is build a product that changes the behavior of individuals, employees. A lot of products in the market right now is the supply chain management view of the world, trying to top-down manage what the future needs to be. And I'd love to see more products like ours that are built for the employee, for the team leader, to make all these data and insights actionable to drive productivity.
Such a different viewpoint from what we hear from other organizations, really taking that strategic workforce planning approach, which is very much top down, as you say. You touched on qualifications, and I just wanted to pick your brains a bit there. Are we seeing the demise of qualifications? Are we seeing, other things become more important than qualifications themselves?
Yeah, let's be a bit provocative. I think the demise of long-term learning paths and qualifications has been occurring for some time, and there's significant change that needs to continue to occur in the education sector. Just purely when you look at how we've shifted from previous industrial revolutions, the fourth industrial revolution, into now future of work from sort of 2023, 24 onwards, and the way jobs and skills are changing, it's too fast for some of those archaic institutions. So do I think there's value in having qualifications and a framework around quality? Absolutely. I think that makes sense. But I think systems need to change so that we can do that in a more iterative approach. And these exist. We see it in all sorts of different trades. We see it in accounting, logbook models where you've got to maintain currency over time is way more appropriate than you learned something 4 years ago and it's still got weighting today. Now we're talking about technical skills and qualifications. The attributes, the critical thinking, the soft skills that you learn is a completely different topic. And I think there's high value in that. But I think in the way that work's going, the model's going to change, has to change.
And I just wanted to pick your brains also, because you gave such a good answer to that, on productivity. So obviously attracting new skills into workforce was going to impact productivity positively. Are there any other productivity gains that you see from both your product and taking the skills-based approach?
Yeah, there's a few productivity return on investment type metrics that we often sort of work with customers. The real obvious ones are the sort of offset of retaining someone and redeploying them as opposed to hiring. Like the maths on that is just simple and available. It's, up to 4 times base salary, to rehire against a role versus reskill someone and redeploy them based on productivity gains. There's sort of an easy one around that. Then there's the stuff around the budget and the spend for outcome on learning content. Lots of organizations have spent a lot of money on available learning content, and employees are often learning things that aren't necessarily aligned to the strategy or the goals of the company. And so we're not seeing clean return on investment there. So being able to rationalize that and learn right skill, right time to achieve the goals is something that we would really drive in our product. And I think that's a core productivity gain. That's not only improving the spend and ROI from a learning and development sense, but it's also increasing the productivity of the workforce because they are learning the skills. Just look at AI. They're learning how to employ it now, and that matters. They're not learning a skill that might help them get their next job in 2 years. So I think that's key. The one that I think is underlying just quickly is most organizations don't have a dollar figure against productivity. So I can go in and say, I think we can improve your productivity through a skills-based approach by 5% in your call center or 5% on your manufacturing floor. What would that be worth to you? They know the answer is big, but they don't really know what the answer is. And so I think we're going to continue to work hard on pulling out those productivity measures because it will have a tangible impact.
Yeah. And is it again, I go a bit back to the whole kind of HR versus rest of the business, line managers, that sort of thing. When you're having that conversation, how easy is it to have that with the HR team? The reason I'm asking that question is because we've done a lot of podcasts over the last year or 2 years around how HR as a function needs to get better at telling the stories that deliver the ROI and using data to evidence their decision makings. In your experience, just with the clients that you kind of speak to on a weekly, daily, monthly, whatever it is basis, whether you're speaking to the HR team or the rest of the business, kind of how good or how effective are HR in being able to articulate this ROI? Is it the HR teams that you're having to work with to talk to the rest of the business, or are you starting with the rest of the business and then the HR team comes along the journey?
I'm seeing both approaches. So traditionally, workforce planning was a financial exercise, and it was driven heavily from where can we save money, where can we make money, and that side of a company's workforce productivity. What we're seeing now is much more of a shift to a people-centric approach to these problems, which by design means it's a leadership problem. And I'm a big advocate for managers and leaders having a loud voice in this space, and a HR problem. Because, the HR central functions need to create the environment for this to be successful. They're designing the policies and the frameworks that will allow team leaders to get after a skills-based approach because it's going to be more productive. Same as what we've done with Agile, same as what we've done with, badging and other things over the years. So I do think in some companies, you will find excited folk that are running business functions that really want to empower their people and solve the skills problem, and they become your drivers, and HR comes on the journey. And in other companies, we're finding it's being led out of HR. HR has a voice and a seat at the executive table, and they're driving budget and spend into something like this because there's a business case that makes sense.
I have a question that you may not have the answer to at your fingertips, but just from the conversation, it's really interesting to hear from what other clients are doing, what other organizations who are really leading their way and their thinking on skills. We talk a lot about digital skills, and I know that's the space that WithYouWithMe play in. Do clients come to you and say, hang on, I've got this skills gap, which you may not solve at this point, but what are the next skill gaps we need to look for?
Yeah, I mean, one of the most common ones that comes up for us across the regions we work in is the health sector. Massive unemployment vacancies across nursing and the health sector in the UK, in Australia, and that's not going away. And so being able to, encourage people to go into those roles, take a skills-based approach into those roles and find the right development paths, I think is growing area. Now, we're not necessarily working in that space, as you say, because we're in digital, but we definitely get customers saying, can we apply this same logic across these other skills? And our generic answer is yes. If your start point is we've got enough people and people have the ability to learn things, how do we unlock new ways for them to learn and restructure jobs? Then we should be able to apply the same logic. But there's new challenges, there's new challenges in blue collar roles, there's new challenges in the health sector, et cetera, et cetera.
So we might have had a glimpse into what's next for With You, With Me. Really fascinating, because one of our previous podcast participants has been organisations in retail who are using people from the nursing sector with those kind of care and customer experience type skills that are really transferable going into retail, where they may have better hours, better pay compared to the NHS or other kind of healthcare type roles. Fascinating.
I think you're right. Like, one of the biggest skills that is coming out of all the AI conversations in market right now is critical thinking. Well, how do we build critical thinking? And if you step back from that and go, which random pockets of people develop really critical thinking skills, you get all sorts of answers. You think about mums and dads that are staying at home with large families and how they run the house and build the family. You can think about complex blue collar roles that you're not even thinking in digital and AI, but they have when you think at a skills layer like that or an attribute layer, I think we can start to unlock different talent pools.
Tom, any great case studies that our listeners could use as a blueprint or a great example to spark some thoughts?
So there's two case studies, one on thinking about talent pools differently and one on getting to the reality of skills base within your organization and what it means. So for the first one, we work with one of our strategic partners, Pearson, a UK enterprise in the US. They run a business called GED Testing Services. GED is the high school equivalency diploma in the US. So if you didn't go to high school, you would go and do the GED assessment. 700,000 people a year apply through Pearson to do the GED assessment, typically from the most challenged and disadvantaged parts of society across the US. And they are showing, resilience, a desire to learn, to build a better life. And they're going through the GED process to do that. And in partnership with WithYouWithMe, off the back of that, we're now running a digital apprenticeship program. Because similar to what we've spoken about on this podcast quite a lot, is a lot of those folks just wanted to achieve their high school diploma because that's the thing that's front of mind that will help them get access to work. And we evolved that thinking to say, but let's look at your underlying ability to then go on and learn really meaningful in-demand skills so you can fill parts of the high-demand skill gaps that are growing in market. And so now we're seeing those folks come on, do their GED, become a service desk analyst, go on a path towards cyber or software development or something else, and they're really changing their life. Now, that's a social mobility solution occurring in a micro sense that has huge economic value for nation states, which is quite exciting.
So you're really plugging that gap or being the facilitator between your education system and employability and joining those dots. Amazing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I go back to something I said right at the start, which is you have to show the candidate that that's achievable and help them on the journey. And then you have to reframe the demand signal. So stop asking me for X amount of years of experience and degrees and start asking me for skills, abilities, affinities, things that are useful in the future. I mentioned two examples. The second example, really quickly, we do a lot of work with the Five Eyes defense community. Our software is deployed in some of those environments and they're using it for very interesting things within their workforce planning. One of the classic examples that came out of that is we did a bunch of work with Pearson and the Australian Army around digital skills. And they realized that one of their particular trades, which was an administrative clerk, was going to be automated by 60% over the next 15 years. So they knew down to a job task layer that that role was going to have 60% automation over the next 15 years. And so the immediate thing is we'll repurpose those positions. What was inside that was circa 25% of their diversity achievement was sitting in those occupations. So you don't want to get rid of that because you just spent a decade encouraging that to come into the workforce. And now it's going to be fully automated. So you're like, well, what do we do with that? And what we realized is actually the skill alignment for that job progression was going to go towards data analytics. And when we aptitude tested all the people that were in those, we had a high affinity to learn future skills that were associated with data analytics engineering. And for the Australian Army to stay on pace with the change, I'll say all they had to do, but what it showed was they had to train 75 people a year to be data analysts. They were already training 200 people a year to be administrative clerks coming in. And so when we got down to that layer, it was like, this is actually really achievable. And I think using that data to get to those layers to make it actionable and not getting caught up just in the workforce planning. And the outcome from that was let's give the people the skills. They've already got the tools and let's just let the employees do their jobs in a more efficient fashion and be more productive. And it worked.
I absolutely love that. It's a really, really good example. And we're just on time for the podcast. And that has absolutely flown by, and some really, really fascinating insight there in terms of, we talked right at the beginning about how businesses that you speak to are leveraging different types of diverse talent pools, the mindset change that is happening at the moment, and how language is evolving, but also understanding is evolving, and a really, really good, great example about how organizations are properly utilizing that skills-based approach with their strategic workforce planning. Tom, it's absolutely amazing to have you join us. It's been a really, really fascinating insight. Thank you very much for giving us some time today.
A real pleasure. Love the podcast. Thanks for your time, both of you.
Yeah, that's great. And Pav, as always, partner in crime, co-host. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. And I just want to plug that With You, With Me will feature in our campaign in the coming months. So look forward to hearing more from you guys.
Yes. Tom, where can people find you or With You, With Me if they want to get a little bit more info?
Yeah, look, definitely WithYouWithMe.com, spelt in full. There's a lot of great stuff on our website. Follow the company on LinkedIn, or reach out if you want to have a discussion about talent pools or future work skilling inside your company.
That's absolutely amazing. So hopefully you've enjoyed this podcast as much as Pav, myself and Tom have enjoyed recording it. Of course, you can get access to all of our back catalogue of podcasts if you just go to lacepartners.co.uk/podcast. And as I mentioned right at the top of the show, if you go to lacepartners.co.uk/skills, you'll be able to see our blogs that we've written around becoming skills powered. There are some live streams that we've done with the likes of Gloat, and Pav mentioned as well with Craig, who is the VP of Talent at Pandora, did the live stream and a podcast with him as well. So lots of great stuff on there. Check it out. From myself, from Pav and from Tom, thank you very much for listening in, and hopefully we'll catch you next time on the HR on the Offensive podcast. Bye-bye.